Hello.
Welcome to Irish Passport.
Let's do it.
Welcome to the Irish Passport.
I'm Tim McInerney.
I'm Naomi O'Leary.
We're friends.
Okay, well to Naomi.
Anwar Fad Tim.
This is your passport to Irish culture, history and politics. I'm recording.
One,
two,
three. Okay.
Hello everyone and welcome to the Irish Passport Podcast.
Hi everyone. In this episode, we are going to delve into the life of one of Ireland's most extraordinary female figures, Granuaile.
Granuaile, the famous Granuaile, also known by some people as Grace Ó Máille. She was, of course, a famous seafarer and the head of a Gaelic clan in the west of Ireland during the 16th century. She was unusual as she was a woman leader, and that wasn't necessarily the norm for the time. She's often known also as a pirate queen. Was she? Was she really? We'll look into it. Now, Granuaile is a figure about whom there is no shortage of myths and legends, but also a lot of really, really fascinating facts. And behind all this is a real historical person who was, in her own time, famous and feared and very, very powerful. Her life can tell us all sorts of things about the world of Gaelic Ireland, which we've been looking into more and more in the last little while. So Naomi, where will we start with Granuaile?
Okay, so I thought we could start by establishing the moment in time that we are talking about, the moment when our story begins. So Granuaile, she was born in 1530, roughly.
Okay.
Into a Gaelic clan. This was the Ó Máilles. The Ó Máilles ruled Murrisk in Mayo, in the west of Ireland, and the Ó Máilles are Ó Máille, right? That's the Gaelic clan. The Anglicization is Ó Máille. So Granuaile's name was Gráinne, and she would keep that name all her life. So she didn't change her surname or anything when she got married. I think it's probably worth mentioning as well that there's probably a pun involved in Granuaile. It sounds like Gráinne the Bald. It's like her first name and her clan name run together, and it sounds like Gráinne the Bald. It might be some kind of pun about her physically because that's really common. Maybe she kept her hair short or something like that. I don't know. We don't really know about that.
There is, of course, a lot of legends that kids would have heard growing up at school, that she cut off her hair as a young girl so that she could sail on the ships with her seafaring family and not get her hair trapped in the ropes of the ships. That seems to be a legend. There doesn't seem to be a very much historical basis for that, but it's a nice image anyway, and
it's
this
plausible.
idea...
It's plausible.
Absolutely.
Okay, so her parents were chieftain, Owen Duda Black Oak Ó Máille, and her mother was Margaret Ó Máille, a part of the same clan.
Okay, so to situate this in time, if we think about where we are in 1530, a very good way to think about Granuaile actually is that she more or less is exactly contemporaneous with Elizabeth I. So she's born around the same time as Elizabeth I. We're talking 1 or 2 years, maybe before or after. We're not totally sure of the year of her birth. And she is reputed to have died in the same year as Elizabeth I. That's 1603. So if we think about this period, it's this period of absolutely enormous, really kind of existential transition in Irish history. So if we go back to 1530, this is before the Act of Supremacy declared by Henry VIII. This is before the English Reformation. And if you go over to Ireland, Gaelic Ireland is still very much intact. What do we mean by that? We mean that it's a very heavily forested place in which English power and influence is really very much confined to small pockets like Dublin, the surrounding area of the Pale, and a few Norman cities. A lot of Ireland, especially in the north and in the west, literally hasn't been mapped yet by the English. They don't really know what is there. And instead, what we have as a power base are clans like the Ó Máilles, who are still living, existing, organising their lives according to Gaelic traditions that had prevailed for millennia before this. So we have in place a very sturdy Gaelic legal system. Practically all of the island, including inside the Pale and the English pockets, is Irish-speaking. There are systems of clans with Taoiseach, who are the chiefs, with Taoiseach, who are kind of the vice-president chiefs. And these clans really have no reason at the time of Gráinne's birth to think that any of this is going to change. This is literally how it has been for thousands of years. It's all they'll ever know, and there's no reason to think that it will ever change in the future. So Gaelic society is the norm in Ireland. This is the dominant culture, and this is the hegemony, let's say. It's going to continue forever. But over the next few decades, this is not actually really what is going to happen. What is going to happen in this Gaelic society is complete and utter destruction, a kind of collapse from the outside and from the inside at the same time, an implosion. The world as Gaelic Ireland knows it is going to fall apart in front of them.
It's going to fall apart over the span of Granuaile's lifetime,
Yeah.
as we'll see. So I thought we could start by getting a picture of what life was like in the household of this Gaelic clan, the Ó Máilles that Granuaile was born into.
Right.
This is a sea-based clan, very interesting. Okay, so geographically, their territory was really perfect for sea power. Okay, so it's made up of Clew Bay, over on the west of Ireland, and the surrounding lands, kind of forming the two arms of the bay, but also the islands. Okay, and if you know Clew Bay at all, it's practically an archipelago. Like there's like hundreds of islands, and they would change a little bit according to the tides coming in and out. Then, of course, part of their territory was also the larger islands that were slightly more out into the Atlantic. So this is like a perfect defensive fortress. You've got these lookout islands which have stone fortifications on them, which the Ó Máilles have built, which they can watch out for. They can hide their ships in among those islands that no one else is going to know how to navigate. And no invader can come in without risking annihilation, either just by crashing the islands and sinking and getting holes in their boats, or by being attacked. So it's kind of perfect for that point of view. It's also a source of wealth because this is incredible fishing territory. So they've got boats, they've got fishing stocks, and they've got this incredible like stronghold there on the west coast.
Yeah, I'm like, to give you a visual of this, it really is an extraordinary place, Clew Bay. There's a tradition in Ireland that there's 365 islands in the bay, that there's one for every day of the year. There's more like 150 in total, we think, but because they do change, it does change according to the tide. And some of these are literally maybe, a few meters across.
Yeah.
What it is actually a landscape of drumlins. So this is a really common feature in Ireland. Drumlin actually comes from an Irish word, drim, which means back or spine. And it does look like maybe kind of like the back of a dolphin rising out of the earth. And if you get them inland, so you get them, for instance, in Monaghan, I think there's quite a big landscape of drumlins. And what you're looking at really is a plain with all of these little ridges, like small ridges, big ridges, almost like a school of dolphins kind of raising their backs out of the land. Now, what you have in Clew Bay are sunken drumlins. So the sea has come in around these drumlins, and the tide covers them and doesn't cover them at varying levels at different times of the day. So they kind of disappear and reappear, and they can be quite big and they can become quite small. And there are hundreds of them. It's so interesting. So like you say, Naomi, I mean, as a kind of defensive place, like this is incredible. If you know this landscape of drumlins very well, you are in a very good position.
And it's unmapped, right? So
right.
if you're local and you know it, you have this knowledge that can't be replicated by anyone else. Like we don't
Absolutely.
have GPS.
Even if you have people coming in who are there for a few weeks, they're not going to know which drumlins are going to appear at which time of day or which time of year or whatever. Also, where the Ó Máille were based on Clare Island, it's like if you imagine Clew Bay as like a wine decanter. I mean, that I was going to say a champagne bottle, but I think a wine decanter is a better descriptor because it's kind of rectangular. And you imagine Clare Island is like a cork. It kind of corks in the bottle.
Right.
So there's no way, it's like a loose cork that is protecting the container that is Clew Bay. Okay. And there's no way to get into Clew Bay without going around this island. You're going to be seen, basically.
It's the watchdog, like the watchtower, right? Yeah.
Look it up, guys. I mean, I know we're going on about it, but it is a really cool strategic place that you can really imagine kind of playing out a lot of warfare games in, yes.
So they were big fishing fleets also massive traders.
Yes.
There is a contemporaneous poem that survives from that time, which mentions that the O'Malleys were familiar with Spain. So it's probable they were trading as far as Spain. What were they trading? Probably exports of things like cattle hides, among other things, leather, and importing wine, probably. So the wine metaphor is probably apt, Tim. They were probably importing a lot of wine from Spain and places like that. And I think it's worth mentioning the kind of boats as well.
Yes.
So what kind of boats are we talking about when we talk about pirates and things like that? The image that might come to mind is like Pirates of the Caribbean or something like that.
Yes, like big ships, frigates.
Big ships that stand up a lot, like have a lot of bulk above the water and loads of sails and stuff like that. We're not talking about that. We're talking about something slighter, still big, but a lot slimmer, much more quickly maneuverable. So they had both oars and sails. You might have seen the similar boats depicted in like Vikings things, but they would have been way bigger than Viking longboats. So they were clinker built, so that means like overlapping planks. And there's reference in English state papers from the time that mentioned that Ó Máille boats could carry 300 warriors each. So these are massive. They're huge boats. So there's a real kind of like seafaring know-how and technology involved here. And this clan was able to use that to make a very prosperous living. Part of what they did involved our friends from another episode, the Gaelic. Do you remember the Gaelic glass?
Yes, of course, yeah.
So the Ó Máille were basically the logistics back end of Gaelic warfare. They brought warriors for other clans here and there, and they would bring the Gaelic, the hired mercenaries from Scotland, to Ireland, to the places where they were going to be hired to fight wars on behalf of different Gaelic chieftains. If you can imagine this fleet of boats carrying 300 warriors each, and a group of as many as 20 of them arrive all of a sudden, you're talking like they can deliver you an army basically to a particular place on the island.
Yeah, so it's a really striking image. So for memory, the Gaelic are a little bit like Cossacks, like you said. They're hired warriors that lots of different clans in Ireland use in order to fight other clans or to fight foreign enemies or what have you, right? And the Gaelic are also Gaelic. They come from the western Gaelicized part of Scotland. So they're existing within this Gaelic world as well. Now, something interesting about that route as well from, let's say, Clew Bay to Scotland means that you would have seen Granuaile's family sailing up and down the coast of practically half of Ireland all the time. Like, it would have been very visible. You're going to have to go all the way up along the coast of Ulster, all the way up to Scotland and all the way back again. So this would have been a kind of like a famous thing. She would be known far and wide. And also, remember, Ulster is quite difficult to get to at this point by land. We said back in our Conquest series at one point that there was actually only 2 real entrances into Ulster militarily, for instance, on the east and the west coast. But Granuaile and her fleet of ships can bypass all of that, just kind of careening forward. I think when you were mentioning the boats there, Naomi, I think a good kind of lead to think about how the boats might have looked might be to look at the traditional boats that are still used in Galway Bay now, which are the Galway hookers, and they're designed for the same kind of seas. Now, they probably didn't look exactly like that. Like you said, they would have been much bigger. But in terms of the infrastructure of them, or how do you say, the design of them, the engineering of them, they probably were fairly similar. So careening, long, very elegant, quite low boats with a big capacity. You can get a lot in there, but they're quite long and narrow, and with big sails that allow you to sail along the currents into bays and then also out into the open Atlantic.
It's probably worth mentioning as well that west coast of Ireland, sailing around the north and west, that is tough sailing almost any time of year. Like the serious weather systems you have coming in over the Atlantic means that these would be very, very skilled sailors. It's not for the faint-hearted at all. Okay,
so at the same time, we have this kind of seafaring side, but the O'Malleys are very much a clan, right? They have towns, they have territory under their control, right?
Right, they have dozens of towns. It's like a kind of it's not always clear what we mean by town. Like
Sure.
if we look
Settlement, I
at town
suppose.
in the records,
Mm.
but yeah, there are mentions of dozens and dozens, scores of towns under their control, and all of those towns are paying like a kind of tithe. They pay a certain amount of their intake to this clan lord guy, and they're also like subsidiary families that have sworn allegiance to them, and all of the area, all of the towns under their control, they are obliged to furnish fighting men. So when the O'Malley's want to muster like a fighting force, they look to their territories and all the kind of the people who live within it and allied families, and that's where they can draw their men from. And they had a substantial fighting force from that.
Okay, all right.
So there is an actual document from the time which captures an image of the O'Malley's.
Mm.
There was a traveller from England who actually came to stay with the O'Malley clan. Now, this was actually after Granuaile's time. So it's actually, he stayed with Granuaile's grandson. But it's the same family. They've had the same traditions still going at that point. So it gives us an idea of the family, setup and what Granuaile would have been born into. So this is John Dunton, and he described staying with the O'Malleys during a summer boolie. We've discussed boolieing in the past. It was the summer tradition of Gaelic families. They would take their cattle herds, and remember, like a substantial part of Gaelic wealth is represented in the cattle herd.
Mm.
They would travel with their cattle herds up into the mountain uplands and stay there during the summer months. And they would erect a temporary building there. And this is how John Dunton describes life during that summer boulet with the O'Malley family.
Okay. The house was one entire long room without any partition. In the middle of it was the fireplace with a large wood fire, which was in no way unpleasing, though in summertime. It had no chimney, but a big hole for the smoke at the ridge. They had newly put up this for a boulie, or a summer habitation, the proper dwelling or mansion house being some miles further, near the sea. And such a one they commonly built every year in some place or other, and thatched it with rushes. I had sheets and soft white blankets, and they assured me that no man ever got cold lying on the green rushes, which indeed are sweet and clean, being changed every day, if rain hinders not. We had dinner no less than a whole beef boiled and roasted, and what mutton I know, not so profusely did they lay it on the table. At the end, where the lady sat, was placed a heap of oaten cakes, above a foot high, such another in the middle, and the like at the lower end. At the each side of the middle heap were placed 2 large vessels filled with buttermilk and sweet milk. We had such ale and bulkan, and after dinner my host ordered his dogs to be got ready to hunt the stag. He had his horse saddled and one for me too. 18 long greyhounds and above 30 footmen made up the company. What a scene, Naomi.
What a
That is
scene.
so visual, isn't it?
Isn't it? Yeah, like just the sheer abundance. Like he can't even tell how many sheep have been slaughtered. So abundant is the mutton, on
Yeah.
the heaving plates. And then after they feast, it's time to go hunt. And like there's 30 footmen,
Yeah.
this is a wealthy scene. They have things in abundance. It's very different from, I suppose, the depictions of wealth and aristocracy of the time that we're familiar with.
Sure.
This is Gaelic.
Yeah.
But it's fascinating to think like they did not want for things, they had plenty.
Yeah. And the kind of stuff they have is so specifically Irish, isn't it? I mean, it's
Yeah.
the same stuff that you kind of associate with bounty now in
Yeah.
Ireland. Dairy and meat, and oat cakes and buttermilk. And
Yeah.
like it is the produce of the land where he is, that is their symbol of wealth, which is quite
Yes,
interesting.
That's it. Yeah, very native. Yeah, very local.
Absolutely.
So yeah, these big clan systems, and they, this would come part and parcel with a whole system of things like traveling musicians, traveling poets that would, come and perform, even professional gamblers that used to go from household to household. This is a glimpse into the world of Gaelic Ireland intact.
Right. Okay. So now I think it's worth looking into the geopolitics
Yeah.
of this area that we're looking at here. So we are in Connacht at
Yes.
this point. Now, like we said at the beginning of the episode, we're situating ourselves at the beginning of the Tudor conquest, and we have to start imagining that new English colonists, so new kind of colonial fronts, let's say, are being sent in from England during these decades from the east. And Dublin is the base from which they're sending out colonial expeditions quite violently to subdue the people. Now, we're going to get into more of that later. But throughout this colonial expedition, we have this one big barrier in Ireland, which is the Shannon. The Shannon is this, mighty river which runs down right through the centre of Ireland. And it's not just that it's a barrier physically. I mean, you can get over the Shannon. There are plenty of crossings over the Shannon. But there isn't much need to get over to from the Shannon, because once you get across the other side of the Shannon, the land is drastically poorer and less interesting to the colonists. So they don't pay as much attention to the land west of the Shannon throughout this whole thing, really until the end, which makes it a kind of a Wild West kind of place. Now, this has always been the case during the colonization of Ireland. The Normans too, they came west of the Shannon, but it wasn't their primary veil of riches. This is
kind of an afterthought.
A bit of an afterthought.
Yeah.
So we have, the main city. We had Athenry, which was a fairly big city at the time, but Galway was the main urban centre in Connacht, and that it wasn't that big, compared to the other Norman cities. It was an outpost. We think of it a little bit like Los Angeles or San Francisco at the beginning of the 20th century. It's kind of surrounded by unknown, still. So in this area, what we have are three major powers. So most of Mayo, surrounding Clúbe, where the Ó Máille are, is a family, an old Norman family called the Burkes or the de Burghs. Now, they have become completely Gaelicized.
Right.
So if you listen to our Conquest series, you will have remember about how the original Norman settlers in Ireland over the centuries got assimilated into Gaelic culture. Gaelic culture remained dominant, and in order for them to survive as a culture, they kind of had to go along with it. So at this point, even though these people were originally descended from, let's say, Welsh settlers in about 400 years before, these people now dress like the Irish, they spoke Irish, they followed Irish traditions, they were nominally still loyal to England, but culturally they were very much Gaelicized. So they had actually changed their names. They weren't known as the Burkes anymore locally. They had changed their name to Mac William Iachtar, which means Mac William Lower, which is very confusing because they're north and the upper is actually south, but never mind, guys, just don't get into it.
That is confusing.
So there's plenty of names that we're going to hear them referred to. This was the name that the Gaelic Irish would have called them, and the English keep calling them the Burkes, right?
I
So
see.
that's where we are. They're the main power. They are surrounding the Ó Máille inland.
Okay.
Below them is the most powerful place on the island, which is the area known as Clan Rickard. Now, Clan Rickard comes from Clan Rishtard, which means the clan of Richard. They are also Burkes. I'm not going to get into it.
Okay, they're Burkes too, right?
They're also Burkes, but they went a different direction. And they're the ones who have the best land, basically. Okay. They have the best land. It's in East Galway. That's where all the farming is. That's where all the good cattle are going to be. And they're the power in the region. So them and the Mac William Iachtar are always kind of battling between themselves. So we have the Clan Rickards and the Mac William Burkes. Finally, we have this wild card. So this is west of the River Corrib. So we've gotten across the Shannon, we've gotten into unknown territory, and now we have to get across another mighty lake, basically. So this is the last frontier. We can think about it like this.
Yeah.
And Galway City was built strategically right on the River Corrib as a kind of bridge between these two worlds, this last frontier. But west of the River Corrib, we have what's very bad land. So this is an area between the mountains, a mountain range known as na Bianna Biola, or the 12 Pins, and this kind of long stretch of coast along Galway Bay. And in between the mountains and the sea, it's basically just acid bog, right?
Okay.
There's very little there. It's very difficult to do farming. Not something that colonists or even Normans would be particularly interested in setting up. And it becomes a refuge, basically, for the Gaelic tribes that used to live in the rest of Connacht. Now, these are the O'Flaherty. The O'Flaherty, this ferocious tribe that is like notorious in Connacht and in Ireland, the O'Flaherty. And we can think about them as having been forced into this area over about 300 years.
Okay.
So Galway City is built as a walled settlement. There was a settlement there already where the O'Flaherty used to live happily and openly, but a walled city was built there by the Normans in the 13th century.
Right.
And from that point on, the O'Flaherty were forced out into Connemara. This is basically what we're talking about is Connemara. And the O'Flaherty ever since had basically constructed an identity for themselves of revenge against the Normans, right?
Right.
So their whole identity and culture was built on raiding Galway City and raiding anything that was east of Lough Corrib and the River Corrib. So once you got out of Galway City and you went west, you would immediately come up against a line of defensive castles from the O'Flaherty. So they were like nose to nose. They were just waiting outside the walls west of Galway City for any misfortune that might happen to the people of Galway so that they could take advantage of it. And they would raid Galway City through Galway Bay. So Galway Bay was a very rich fishing ground. This was one of its strategic things. But they would raid Galway City through economically by taking the fish, by taking the trade that was coming in from Spain. Basically this kind of menace that was there. To the point that on that western gate of Galway City leading out into Connemara, there were words inscribed. It said, "From the ferocious O'Flahertys, God protect us." So it's actually written in stone on the gate, right? As a kind of prayer, I suppose. Because that shows you how terrifying they were, I suppose. There was violence and trauma involved here, I suppose, for those people. And on the old medieval church that was built in Galway City, St. Nicholas's, the clock was taken off the church tower facing west so that the O'Flaherty couldn't see what time it was.
That's so petty.
It's pretty petty. Maybe militarily kind of strategic as well. But so that's the situation that we're in. Now, why is this important? Well, it's important because we kind of have the Wild West on two fronts here. We have the Wild West in terms of the Gaelicized Normans who have gone native, who are fighting amongst themselves, who are kind of vying for control in a feudal way, right, between the Clan Rickard and the Burkes. And we also have this kind of behemoth of Gaelic culture and power and tradition that is sitting there as well fighting with them.
Right.
Now, Gráinne is born into the Ó Máille, which are a Gaelic family, but who have absolutely had to live their lives according to the rules of Norman Ireland because they're surrounded by the Gaelicized Burkes. So they're not necessarily Normanized, but they're very much kind of existing in a Norman world. You know, it's just a Norman's world and they're just in it, you know, right?
Yeah.
So Gráinne, if we think about Gráinne as a strategist or as someone coming up in terms of power, this is the powers that she has to deal with.
Right. Interesting.
Yeah.
And I think at this point, legally,
Right.
neither Ó Máilles nor O'Flahertys are allowed to come into Galway. They are banned. They cannot enter.
Right.
Which I think starts to lend some level of understanding to us as to what the O'Malleys are doing when they start to attack Galway merchants. Galway merchants were very much against the Ó Máille because they were a sea foe in the same way that the O'Flahertys would have been on land. This is something that would have kind of been a feature for coastal life everywhere at the time. That you could have fighting men coming in on ships and they could raid you and they could take stuff and they could, take people prisoner and so on. And in this part of the world, it was the Ó Máille who were those feared people. Now, I think from their perspective, they would have been doing it for good reason. I don't think that they would have seen it as random acts. They would have seen, I suppose, anyone who wasn't their ally as kind of fair game. A
rival.
Right. And someone who they could raid. And from here we get the word applied to them, pirate.
Right. Yeah, I mean, let's talk about this word pirate then for a minute. Because I think, let me start here, right? Everyone was a pirate. In the 16th century, anyone on the sea was effectively a pirate, in terms of what we think about it.
Okay.
And what I mean is that is attacking other ships and taking their stuff, basically stealing, but being a criminal on the sea. That's what everyone was doing, only that if it was authorized, it wasn't called piracy.
Yes.
It was called privateering. But if you ever hear about English privateers or Spanish privateers or French privateers, I mean, this is what the European powers were doing on the sea. If you think about people like Walter Raleigh sailing across the Atlantic and dilly-dallying around, and he comes into contact with a Spanish ship, he will attack it and take their stuff, right. if it is convenient or expedient to do so. Yeah. And he's allowed to, it's legal, basically.
He has what's called a letter of marque from the monarch, right? Which is basically like you are allowed to attack any Spanish, Portuguese, or whatever you come across in the name of the monarch.
In the name of the realm,
yeah. In the realm.
If you don't have that authorization, you're a pirate. That's the only difference.
Right.
It's whether you're allowed to or not, right? So it is like, I mean, we could think about it, I suppose, like the word terrorist, right?
Yeah.
It's like, it depends on who's saying that you're a terrorist, right?
Yeah, it's trite, but one person's terrorist is another person's freedom fighter, and it's kind of the same for pirate.
Yeah, and it's similarly kind of politically loaded as
Yeah.
well, because you are kind of saying that's the enemy by definition, these people, because they're not authorized
Yeah.
to do the same thing that we're doing, right?
At the time, the O'Malleys were much feared, we should say. Like there are written records stating that, you know, this was a force to be reckoned with in the area,
Yeah.
and they were trouble to anyone who was operating in this part of the world.
Yeah. I would maybe add another thing. There's if we think about that comparison with the word terrorist, I suppose there is another layer of like calling someone a pirate, which is like that's the insult, that you're doing it without Her Majesty's permission, you traitor. You know,
Right.
like there is a sense of that as well. That like the actual robbing or the stealing isn't much the
problem.
crime. It's
Right.
the fact that you're doing it kind of illegally, so disgraceful of you. You know,
Right.
yeah. Mm.
So interesting. I wonder how many other words there are, like outlaws, bandits, and
Yeah,
versus
bandits a good one.
soldiers.
Yeah.
Anyway, so Granuaile, she grew up on Clue Island.
She grew up on Clare Island.
Clare
Yeah,
Island, so
Clare
excuse
Island. Really interesting name, actually, because it comes from the Irish Clera, which is still used out there, which means obscure.
Oh,
It's the obscure island. Just I thought it was a
that's
strangely intriguing
very
name.
poetic. Yeah.
It's this very windswept rocky place. There's no trees really on the island, not unusual for an island off the west coast. Like I said, it guards the entrance to Clew Bay. There's a 13th century abbey on the island, so by the time Gráinne was born, that abbey had already been there 200, 300 years, right? And inside that 13th century abbey, we have an inscription written. It says, Ó Máille terra marique potens, which means the O'Malley valiant by sea and land.
Oh, wow. I wonder when that dates from. I think the O'Máille clan have kind of a reputed or oral history going back to about the 4th century AD,
Right.
something like that.
Yeah.
Some victory in a battle.
I saw the same. Yeah, I
Yeah.
saw the same. They go back very far.
Very
It gets
old family.
murky, of course, once you get back before written records.
Yeah.
But there's no reason to believe that they aren't millennia old because, like we said in our Conquest series, Gaelic Ireland is kind of uninterrupted before the conquest for a good 2,000 years. Like, it is unbelievably old, linearly old, right? You know, kind of doesn't have any huge shocks to it except for this Norman invasion in the 12th century, which just gets absorbed anyway, like eventually. So like how much of a shock that was really is debatable. Now, we don't know that much about her education, but we do know that she was educated for sure, which was a thing that people high up in Gaelic society got educated. You know, that's what they did. There were schools ran by a caste of people called the Ullav. And we know that she was educated in quite a practical way because of what she did. She was a leader. And just to be a leader, you needed like quite academic education. So, for instance, she would have needed to know a lot about geography. So if she was going to lead her clan in doing things like going to Scotland and, you know, bringing back Gallogly, she needed to know a lot about that in theory. She would have had to sit down and learn that, you know, quite in depth, how to get to Scotland, when to go there, how to get back, you know, etc. It's not just something you learn on the job, you know, right? And things, of course, like political education. So knowing, like, what's the deal with those people in Galway City and why do the O'Flahertys not like them? You know, that you would have had to learn history, diplomacy, you know, a lot of this, very similar to, like, what you need to be a leader today.
Right.
Finance is another one. She would have really needed to understand finance quite well in order to...
For trading, accounts, all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Absolutely. So that's kind of interesting. And she lives there until she is about 15 or 16. Now, we're going to get into her married life in a minute, but there is an interesting legend from Clare Island, which the people of Clare Island still talk about today, which is that before she left when she was 15 or 16, that there was a ship wrecked off the coast of Clare Island, which you can imagine with all these drumlins, and that a man was washed up on the shore and she fell in love with him. Yes. It's all very Little Mermaid. And she decides, like, he's mine. So she takes him by the wrist, I suppose revives him, slaps him across the face a few times, takes him by the wrist and brings him to St. Bridget's Well. Now, we made an episode about St. Bridget recently enough. These wells possibly of pagan origin, but Christianized at this point. So very old and very sacred site on Clare Island. Still there today. You can go and see St. Bridget's Well. She takes him by the wrist, brings him to St. Bridget's Well, and marries him.
Okay.
And I think very much the verb is she marries him.
Okay.
You know, and it doesn't sound like he has much say in the matter.
Okay.
But she absolutely loves him. Now, very shortly afterwards, he gets killed by the MacMahons, who are raiding the Ó Máille at this point, and she goes absolutely berserk, takes the ship by herself, goes to the MacMahons, cuts them off as they're trying to get away, kills them all,
Okay.
takes their castle and sets herself up inside it.
Okay, so this is like some kind of like villain origin story
Yes.
kind of thing for Granuaile. We have to say as well, like, okay, there are so many myths and legends about
Yes.
Granuaile. There were so many of these stories.
Yeah.
Every locality where she was like known to have lived her life has these kinds of stories about her.
Yeah.
And we don't really know how much of it is truth and how much of it is fiction.
Yeah.
But something again which is kind of consistent is the personality that comes through, right?
Exactly.
Someone who was extremely audacious, brave,
And more powerful
more
than
so.
men.
more powerful
That's
than
a
men, I
big
suppose.
thing
Yeah.
about her. Like
Yeah,
she's like,
interesting.
whenever she's around a man, it is that, no, she's more powerful than him. Like,
Yeah.
people say that out loud a lot when they're
Okay.
talking about her, right?
She's like a conquering warrior type.
Yeah.
So yeah, extremely fearsome.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yes, so that's very much in the realm of legends, but let's get into the realm of more fact.
Yeah.
And she did get married quite young, like we say.
She got married around 16.
Yeah.
Yeah. So she was married in 1546 to Donal an Coga O'Flaherty. So he was the heir to the clan of O'Flaherty. Now, this would have been a very good political match.
Yes.
We're talking about the two Gaelic clans of the area. We've just kind of like sketched out who the O'Flaherty are. And Donal was very much a kind of a typical Gaelic chieftain type, I suppose. He was quite involved in feuding and warring at the time. So they're kind of a power match, right?
They are. He's got this name. Donal an Coga means Donal the Battle O'Flaherty.
Okay, right.
So it's like Donald the Battle, you know, John the Battlesmith. They all have names like this. Actually, all his brothers have names similarly to this. But he does seem to be a big Gaelic man around town, and he is the Taoiseach of this O'Flaherty family. You know, he's like, he would have been a big mover in this region, the whole region.
They had 3 kids.
Yeah.
And interestingly enough, it's during the time of this marriage, so while she is in the process of having kids and like starting her married life, that we get the first record of her kind of branching out as an independent trader, independent operator. What she seems to do is she seems to relocate to lands and property which she inherited through her mother. So she was a double heir. She inherited stuff through her mother, Margaret, and also through her father. And she was the sole heir of that particular couple. She probably had a half brother or something, but he had another mother, it seems to be. Anyway, so she inherited property through her mother, so she had this base, and during that first marriage was when she situated herself there and started to operate as a kind of independent entity on the sea.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is the position of her legally as a woman in Ireland is actually very important to what comes next in her life, actually. Now, I know I keep harking back to previous episodes, but listeners would definitely like to listen to the episode that we made on the lost world of Gaelic Ireland, because we do go into this quite in depth.
Yeah.
One of the things that we mentioned in that were marriage laws. And now we have to keep in mind that Gaelic Ireland was a patriarchal society, so women were not allowed to be Taoiseach, for instance. They couldn't technically, legally lead a clan, but they could accumulate wealth in quite a robust way. So there were 3 or 4 things that really make marriage for Gráinne into a tool, I suppose, rather than a hindrance. So first thing is that a woman could initiate divorce whenever she wanted, right? And she could just walk away from a marriage. She had to have solid claim under Gaelic law. So there had to be like, you know, a court case, you know, I'm divorcing you because, but that was it. You had dowries involved. So when Gráinne got married, she brought a big dowry, right, to the marriage. And that's what women were supposed to do. But in the event of a divorce, if you wanted to walk away from the family, you took your dowry back. You took it with you, right? You walked away with it. It also happened if your husband died. So you got your own stuff back, right? So it's less of a dowry. It's more like a down payment, almost. It's like, if this marriage doesn't work out, I want my deposit back, like, basically. There's that, and most importantly, they kept their property. This is very, very unusual in Europe at the time. That, of course, like if we think about marriage, and like this is how marriage worked basically right up until the mid 20th century, right? Once you got married, what's yours is mine, what's mine is yours. All your stuff was given away to your husband. He became basically the owner of your property.
Right.
Not in Gaelic Ireland. You didn't get his, he didn't get yours. You both kept your own stuff, right? And that meant that you could have, for instance, military power. If, in the case of someone like Gráinne, your stuff was maybe a warship, you kept your warship. And you could buy more stuff, and your husband had no right to take that off you, right? So you can be independently powerful and significant in your own right from within a marriage.
Yeah.
If we think, I just made me think about the ancient, or the ancient mythology of Queen Maeve, and in the Táin, right? So listeners will be familiar with the Táin, where we have this female queen who is going to war with her husband because he has a cow that she wants, and she has this different cow, right? It's a bull, rather. You can see it there. You can see how old this is. That
That's
like the whole
interesting.
basis of the Táin is that Maeve has her own property,
Yeah.
and he has no right to it. Like they're both separate property owners from within a marriage, to the point that they can go to war with each other about this property. It's interesting.
So Gráinne had lands.
Yeah.
She had a stronghold, like a physical dwellings, house, and she had ships. The records vary of stating, like across her career, that she had between 3 and 20 galleys at her command. So this is a significant force.
Right.
So at this time, although we've been saying that Gaelic Ireland is very much intact at this point, a foretelling of what's going to come over the sea from England is starting to reach these lands. So what's happened to Donal Cuggy O'Flaherty is that his claim on land has been disrupted by a rival legal system. So at this time, the policy of surrender and regrant had been introduced. So basically, Gaelic lords were given the option. You can retain your title, you can retain your hereditary lands if you swear fealty to the monarch in England, and then you are re-granted your land, you're re-granted possession of them under the authority of the English monarchy. And this is a way of imposing the English legal system over Ireland and English authority, which contrasts to Gaelic law, because the way that power was transferred under the Gaelic system was different. It went from Taoiseach to Taoiseach. And Donal, as we mentioned, was a Taoiseach. So he was kind of like the runner-up chieftain. He was due to inherit. What happened was a rival claimant, basically, the son of the previous chieftain, now claimed to be the inheritor of the land under the alternative English legal system through surrender and regrant. So Donal the Battle was engaged in warring over this territory, and it killed him. He got killed. He was killed trying to ensure his claim, basically. Part of what was going on was this struggle for a place which is now called Hen's Castle. I think it's worth like just noting the story about Hen's Castle. It's another one of these myths, but it's just kind of like there's something very satisfying about these stories.
Yeah.
It used to be known, it's said, as Cock's Castle. And then what happened was, after Donal was killed in the battle, Granuaile went to the castle. The victors who had killed Donal expected to find the castle empty and to be able to take it, but instead they found Granuaile there, and she saw them off. And from then on, it's been known as Hen's Castle instead of Cock's Castle, which is such a satisfying story.
It is a good story. Yeah, he was known as the Cock. Which is a play on his name, I suppose. Cugga, right? Yeah. It's a bit of a play on name. And she became known as the Hen as well, even before this happened.
Oh, even before, okay.
So they were like a power couple, kind of. And I mean, when they're saying cock and hen here, you have to imagine this in the idea of war, because it's a play on his name that, cockerels are like feisty, right? Yes. Roosters, we should say, for our American listeners. This is what we mean. The birds, everyone. Roosters. They are, they're violent creatures, roosters. You think about cockfights, which would have been very popular at this point, right? Yeah. In popular culture. So her being the hen is a very kind of proud title here. It's very cool. Yeah. But the surrender and regrant that's going on, of course, as well, we have to think about it in terms of divide and rule, right? So this is a brilliant kind of piece of the strategy of the surrender and regrant process that was introduced back in the day of Henry VIII, to do exactly what you're saying. So you have the normal transmission of power from Taoiseach to Taoiseach, but then the Taoiseach's son says, no, I am no longer the Taoiseach of Clan Rickard. I am the Lord of Clan Rickard, and according to the English law that says that I'm the Lord of Clan Rickard, it comes to me, not to the Taoiseach. I want it, right? And it's going to be in my family forever. Right. So you get like disputes within the ruling families within a few years. I mean, it's very destructive, like this whole surrender and regrant thing.
It kind of worsens and plays into an underlying issue in Gaelic Ireland, which was this tendency of feuding, which was one of its kind of fatal flaws. Well, one of the reasons why it was so weak was because there was so much infighting that it was very difficult to form united fronts against the invaders.
So poor old Donal.
Donal died.
Yeah. And
Granuaile, now widow, grows into herself as an independent force.
Very much so, yeah. So under Brehon law, she can't actually inherit his territory, of course, right? Because all that territory in Iar Connacht is going to the Taoiseach or whoever is going to try and step in.
Yeah.
But it's not hers under either system. She's not going to get it, right? But unlike, we have to remember that if she was existing as a wife under English law, that she would have a right to like be compensated for the marriage, to be kind of kept in her widowhood, right?
Okay, yeah.
That doesn't happen in the Gaelic system.
Okay.
She doesn't get any of it, but she gets to keep her own stuff. Because she already has stuff, right?
She already has stuff.
So she's kind of walks away from that marriage in fairly good shape, but only because she had that stuff, of her own, like, impetus.
To begin with, yeah.
So she goes back to her ancestral island. She goes back to Clare Island, and she kind of sets herself up as an independent leader. Mm-hmm. And I think it's really interesting here now. I mean, I really would love to be a fly on the wall to how this all works, because women cannot be Taoiseach at this point, right? But they all just let her be a Taoiseach anyway. Yeah. And it must have just been like, no, listen, you're clearly the best person for this job. Just do it. And like, we won't say anything.
Yeah, that's fascinating, right? Because there's no precedent. There's no structure to explain, this woman leader. But she just does it.
Is.
Yeah, just is.
Yeah.
That's it. And I suppose maybe that explains how she got to be the figure she was to begin with. She just doesn't seem to ask permission. She just does it. Yeah. That just is who she is. Yeah.
I mean, she must have actually just been so formidable. I mean, there's a danger when we're talking about big historical figures like this to kind of think about them as these like larger than life figures who could do anything. Yeah. But like from the events of her life, that's the only real explanation. People must have just been so impressed by her that they were like, you are the best person for this job. Forget precedent.
Impressed and afraid.
Yeah, impressed and afraid. Yeah, absolutely.
And obviously she was very good at using what she had to hold on to power and to build on it.
Right.
So she had families that were loyal to her, who were working for her as warriors, who were loyal to her, and she treated them well. She kept them well, and she appreciated them. So she maintained loyalty as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So from these vassals, let's say, that she has under her influence, she puts together a bit of an army, and she becomes a bit of a force on the western coast. And this is when she has her second marriage. So about 2 years after her first husband dies in 1567. So she's about 35, 37, maybe mid-30s. Yeah. And she marries Rishtard on Iran, right?
Iron Richard.
Richard.
This is one of the Burkes.
Yes.
Burkes /
William MacIchters.
Exactly.
Yes.
William MacIchters. So whether you're, calling them by their Gaelic name or their English name. So these former Normans who become Gaelicized.
Okay.
Quite a lot of the stories about Granuaile from this period, though, talk about her exacting revenge. So she seems to still be quite preoccupied with the death of her first husband, according to the kind of oral tradition of tales about her, which have her, attacking and exacting revenge for various reasons to do with the death of her previous husband. So she hasn't quite moved on.
No, she's one to hold a grudge, Gráinne.
Yes,
I think that's fair to say.
Yeah.
Now, some sources say that she divorced from Iron Richard, Rishtard and Iran, quite quickly after a year that he came home and he found all his clothes thrown out the window. But that doesn't seem to be the case. Yeah. I mean, it could have happened, and maybe she married him again, because she stays in his house, basically, until after he dies. Like, they live together and stuff. She is very much the boss in that relationship, and everyone who encounters them is happy to say that. I mean, that's obvious to everyone. But this is during this time that things get really spicy, right? So we're up to the we're up to the 1570s at this point. This is another really interesting thing, that so many of these things happen when we're looking at Gaelic Ireland or history in general. So many things happen to people in their 20s. You never hear about like really exciting things happening to when you're 40, because like 40 was old at this stage. That was, quite an advanced age.
But she just had like a very long, exciting career. I mean, I think there's references to her in letters as 40 years of being, well, what was described as a pirate, but like that's a very long career.
Yeah, absolutely. So in the 1570s, what is happening in Ireland? 1570s, 1580s. I'm going to call back to one of our previous episodes again, just in case listeners want to listen to it. You might listen to our Conquest series on the Desmond Rebellion.
Right.
Because this is what's happening. Now, in a nutshell, what is happening is that the English crown is sending in new English settlers to clean up the act of the Gaelicized Normans. Now, this is an interesting, really interesting facet for Gráinne, because she is surrounded by Gaelicized Normans, right? So the power that is all around her are these kind of technically loyal men who are actually quite Gaelic and in reality are acting autonomously. Now, these new English colonial administrators are trying to get rid of them, basically.
Okay.
They're trying to sweep away people like Clan Rickard. They're trying to sweep away people like the Borks. They don't say this, but this is the ultimate goal, because they want to take that land, divide it up into smaller plots, and then colonize it in the same way as they've colonized North America.
Right.
This is their ultimate end goal. It's going to make Ireland a lot more easy to control. It's also going to make Ireland a lot more profitable from a financial point of view, right? So they're not saying this, but this is what they're getting at. And one of the big steps towards this process is the dismantling of the Desmond Lordship. So the Desmond Lordship was this area, all of the south of Ireland, basically. Kerry, Cork, Waterford, this huge swathe of land in the south of Ireland that at this point is getting completely and utterly dismantled violently by these new English administrators. They're starving out the people. They're murdering women and children specifically to try and make the population collapse. Like, it's an incredibly violent and awful time with a lot of spectacular violence as well. We're talking about like whole percentages of the population just disappearing through genocide. This is an absolutely targeted genocide campaign. So Gráinne at this point knows that, she's vulnerable, not necessarily for being Gaelic, but for relying on Gaelicized Normans.
I see.
Right? They are no longer a kind of buffer for Gaelic people like her. Secondly, something happens, which is that Henry Sidney, who is one of these genocidal maniacs, who is the Lord Lieutenant of Ireland, one of the famous ones, he comes to Galway.
Okay.
Now, this was really unusual. They didn't normally leave the east of Ireland, right? They very rarely cross the Shannon. First of all, why would you? And second, because there's just no interest over there for them financially. And secondly, it's dangerous. Like, on the other side of the Shannon, it is dangerous for someone like Henry Sidney, who is the Lord Lieutenant of Ireland. At this point, I just find this so interesting. We're in the 1570s. At this point, Henry Sidney would have had A. O'Neill living with him in his house. Right?
Oh, right.
Yeah.
He had taken the heir, right?
Yes.
And he was bringing him up in like English ways.
Yeah, sorry listeners, if you haven't listened to it. You have to listen to all our episodes, guys, to keep up with us. In our Conquest episode, we mentioned how a little Gaelic boy called A. O'Neill who was very powerful heir of the Gaelic dynasty in Ulster, was taken into this Lord Lieutenant's house to be groomed as a kind of symbol of Englishness. He ends up being the great rebel, the great traitor, they called him, who leads an All-Ireland rebellion against English colonization. I'll stop that there before I get carried away. But I find this so interesting how all this is tied in.
Right.
Gráinne's already, advanced at this stage. She's set up herself. She comes down to Galway to see him.
Okay.
And now he is basically there doing an audit, I suppose. He's checking the place out. He's saying, what's going on here? We have all these weird merchant families who are like managing this place on their own buck. Who's the lord? Like, where's feudalism gone? What's going on?
Yeah.
You people seem to be very rich, but like you're not doing things in the normal way. Gráinne comes down and she says, hi, Henry, hi, Gráinne. Basically, like, lovely to meet you. I just really wanted to chat.
So she just comes down like one expecting to treat face to face with this guy who probably is like, who the hell are you, a wild Western woman?
That's exactly what he says. We actually have a quote from him.
Okay.
Yeah, here, I'll give it to you now.
Okay. So this is recorded in Sidney's diary. A most feminine sea captain came to me, called Granny Ó Máille, and offered her services where I would command with 3 galleys and 200 fighting men, either in Ireland or in Scotland. She brought with her husband, for she was by sea as well as by land more master and mate to him. He was of the Nether Burks, and now I hear is MacWilliam Aichter, called by the nickname Richard on Iron. Okay, so he had the same like dealing with the names issue as us, obviously.
Yeah.
That's very interesting. He recorded that in his diary.
There's so many interesting things to pick apart about this.
Yeah.
I mean, we better start at the end there.
Yeah.
The way he's calling them, the Nether Burks,
The
right?
Nether Burks.
the lower Burks, who now I hear is MacWilliam Aichter, and he's anglicised Aichter, by the way, to like Eighchter. You know,
Right.
I suppose they're just writing down Gaelic words phonetically.
Yeah.
Now I hear
It's a bit catty.
I mean, but also he's been MacWilliam Aichter for hundreds of years.
Okay.
You know, that territory has been Gaelicised for hundreds of years at this point. And I think this is actually quite sincere because in London, they're probably written down in the books as the Burks.
Okay,
right?
so they didn't know that they had this other name?
Not necessarily.
Right.
I mean, maybe like, I'm sure a lot of people did, but Henry Sidney hadn't been told. Like, what, they're calling themselves like a different name, like an Irish name.
It's worse than we thought.
Exactly. And it is catty because this is exactly what the New English are here to do. They're here to clean up stuff like this. It's like, what the hell is happening? You're calling yourself by a new name? You know, that's not your name.
You're calling by yourself some Gaelic name.
Some Gaelic name, yeah. Also, I love the way he calls him Richard on an Iron. Richard an Iron. I mean, it just changes because, of course, it's on Iron, which is the Gaelic for iron. You know, same word, basically, coming from Latin. But
Richard an Iron.
I mean, it makes him sound like Richard, like the iron.
Yeah.
That you're gonna kind of iron his shirts. Okay, now, hold on. We need to get to the main thing.
Yeah.
She brought with her her husband, for she was by sea as well as by land, more master and mate to him.
Yeah, that is funny. Yeah.
Great, right?
Yeah.
Like I say, everyone who sees her is like, well, she's the boss.
She's the boss, obviously. She brought with her husband.
Exactly.
It's gas.
Yeah, it is very good.
And she's described as a sea captain.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, I mean, this is, like we were saying, is like, this is just obvious. Like, she was the boss to everyone. She was presenting herself as the boss. There was no ambiguity about this.
I guess she must just have had boats from a very young age.
Yeah.
I suppose she learned seafaring from, you know, her family. And once you're in command of vessels, you are a boss, I suppose.
Yeah, people treat you like the captain.
Especially when it's as powerful as those boats meant economically, socially, politically in that part of the world.
Yeah.
She just had power from the start.
Yeah, and I do take it as she must have been standing, I mean, it's trite, right? But this idea of her standing at the helm of the ship, you know, with like hair or lack thereof flowing in the wind, right?
Yeah.
I mean, she must have been doing that for people to get this impression of her.
She would have been, I mean, she was captaining it. I don't know if she was standing at the front, but she may be commanding from the back, I think. Yeah.
Oh, right, is that what you do? Oh, right,
Usually.
yeah, sure, of course. Right. This shows my knowledge of boats. Anyway, so listen, she says to him, like we see, she says, would you like my help? So she's basically getting in there before everyone else, saying, I'm not a threat to you, right? I'll give you some help if you want whatever your little wars are. Remember now, Gráinne has no kind of sense that she needs to be on one side or another of this war.
Yeah.
To her, he's just a clan, like any other clan would be.
Yes.
So she says, do you want my help? I'll send you some fighting men. And he doesn't.
Okay.
He says, no, I don't want your help, like, basically. But I would like you to show me the coast.
Oh.
So bring me on that ship of yours, on that like strange and exotic ship of yours, and show me the coast of Galway, so that I can figure out like what's actually there, because we don't know what's there. Like the English don't really know what's out in Connemara.
Wow.
So she takes him and she shows him all the defensive like parts, like this is the part where you can hide your ships or whatever. And then she says, and that will be at £400, please. I'm making up a figure here, but she sends him a bill.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's gas.
And he's like, excuse me?
Really?
She invoices him. It's good.
So funny.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot to unpack there. So, like, first of all, I think this should be seen in the light of the O'Malley's having a very long mercenary tradition. So the idea of offering your services to the people who have money in town is just what they do.
Yeah.
Right? So it shouldn't be seen as like a betrayal of Gaelic Ireland. They don't know that's what's going to happen.
No,
right? They don't know this means the end of their way of life. They just are seeking business from the new power in town. And the other thing is that also strategically and cannily, they are out for themselves all the time.
Yeah.
So there's no sense of like a wider loyalty here. This is about the Ó Máille clan, and specifically like your part of it that you're in charge of. They are fending for themselves. So she is seeing a new power coming in and being like, I don't have a quarrel with you. You know, we can come to something mutually agreeable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She recognizes he's going to be in her life. Like, she's got to
Exactly.
deal with him.
So she's got political new. Yeah.
Yeah. And like, they're not the only ones. The Ó Máille are not the only ones who are doing this.
Yeah.
Like, all the clans are acting in this way right up until the 1590s when they're united by A. O'Neill. And that's why uniting the clans together as one force was such a big deal in the 9 Years' War, because they just hadn't been doing that before.
So it's actually one of these new English, right? Who ends up becoming a problem for Granuaile.
Okay.
Although she tried to, come to an arrangement with Henry Sidney, she wasn't actually able to protect her clan from coming into the firing line when it came to the New English.
Yeah. So that appearance of Henry Sidney in Galway in the 1570s, I suppose, was a foreshadowing of what they were up to.
Right.
So at this point, they have subdued Munster. They were setting up actual colonies in Munster. So they're really going ahead with their plan of recolonizing Ireland in this kind of New World way. And they have the luxury, I suppose, to look across the Shannon now. And they're saying, okay, so what's this place? Like, what is going on here? So they're setting about getting this place in order. And they send in this guy called Richard Bingham.
Right.
Very typical New English colonial administrator, colonial state of mind. He's coming into these savages, trying to fix the situation through violence if necessary, and very much looking down on them. Yeah. Now, once this guy comes in, it's a problem for Gráinne.
Yes.
Because there's no more negotiating, really, once you get yourself into this position in the colonial dynamic. Because once the English have decided to colonize your area, they don't care about negotiating with you anymore. They just want you gone.
Yes.
They want all of you gone.
Something I pick up from the original records from the time, so the account the Granuaile left of this interaction, and also Bingley as well, both left accounts. What I pick up from that is that Bingley just did not distinguish between Gaelic clans at all. He just sees rebels everywhere. So everyone is a rebel. Unless you're like his gang, you're an opponent basically to him. So there's none of this, we can ally and you can be our mercenaries and all of that stuff. He's not seeing any nuance at all.
Yeah. Even between the Old English and the Gaelic Irish, right? The Hiberno Normans and the Gaelic Irish. He also he really hates her because she's a woman, actually.
Does he?
Yeah, well, it seems so.
Yeah.
Now, there is a dynamic going on here. So Gráinne and Richard had both surrendered and regranted during this time.
Okay.
Right? So they had gone, basically everyone had, because there was no downside, certainly in the short term for people. People could not see the long-term strategy of this from their positions in Gaelic Ireland.
Okay.
For someone like Gráinne, she would have seen surrender and regrant as extra power, and she gets to keep her own power too. Because it was at the point when she did it, no one enforcing English law in most of Ireland, right? There was just no way to make her do things according to English law. But by getting an English title, she got power in places like, well, she wouldn't have, but her husband would have had power in places like Dublin Castle, right? They would have been able to interact with the colonial system, and they would have been able to go back to Mayo and have power there under the Gaelic system. So there was, win-win, right? She had done this. Most of the Irish clans had done this. They were doing the exact same thing as her. Actually living a completely Gaelic lifestyle. And then when they wanted something that the English system was getting them, they would go to places like Galway and say, I want rent. Or,
your humble servant begs.
Yeah, exactly. The Queen needs to help me because I lost my army or whatever.
Yeah.
They would just exploit the thing, right?
Right. They'd rely on the centre of the metropole not actually knowing anything about them.
Yeah,
and just turn up and be like, oh yeah, I'm your local lord in this part of the world.
Yeah.
And I need this thing, or I have a case against my neighbour, and can you please decide it in my favour, or whatever it has to be.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
So very cynical, right?
Yes.
And illegal as well. Annoyingly, it was all legal what they were doing. They were exploiting the legal system. Bingham hates this.
Okay.
Now he hates that everyone's doing it, but he especially hates that she's doing it because not only is she doing that, just like all the other Taoiseach are, she's a woman. And in his mind, we have to think about the 16th century. In his mind, women were almost kind of evil, right? I mean, there was a very kind of sharp misogyny in 16th century England. If you think about Shakespeare, or think about the court of Henry VIII, or the traditional kind of idea of women, is that they were hussies, you know, they were just kind of evil adjacent
They were how
creatures.
the devil gets to you.
Yeah.
Right.
Like
yeah.
open to the devil, certainly should not be put in charge of anything. You know, like not only will they not do a good job, but they will lead things into sin, you know, just because they can't help themselves, because they're such kind of like naturally sexed up creatures, you know.
Weak-minded and so on.
Weak-minded, etc. Yeah, that's what they're getting at. So he hates it, and he's looking around him and he's saying, guys, does nobody else have a problem with that woman who has all of this power and who's telling all of you guys what to do?
Yeah.
Do none of you have any problem with this? And they're like, no, that's Gráinne. Like, that's just, you know, it's just Gráinne, you know.
Yeah.
And of course, it probably would have been a little bit culturally illiterate of him, because for the Hiberno-Normans and for the Gaelic powers around him, I mean, sure, yeah, it was patriarchal society, but this wasn't that unusual to them, right? Because women could have property and power. So that idea of a powerful woman just wasn't alien to them, I suppose, even if it was unusual.
Yeah, it was unusual. It was part of their heritage in terms of the oral tradition. Obviously, we have references to Maeve and all this. So it may have been more of a feature of Gaelic Ireland at different points in history. It was quite unusual at this point of time, but like it was also a reality that happened. So it was allowed in some way by the system.
Yeah. And on a very kind of basic level, like lots of people knew women who were rich on their own merit,
right?
You know,
they could inherit
independently powerful women, you know, like, so that it just must have been very difficult, I suppose, to see eye to eye on that. Anyway, so he basically says, I don't care about you. I'm going to stop it. I'm taking this down.
Okay.
And he gets his personal vendetta against her.
Okay.
More than all the other teachers who are doing worse things than her often. But he wants her taken down.
Okay.
Right.
Interesting. So what happens is her family becomes entangled in this war, and a number of her family members end up being captured or killed by this guy.
Right.
The events of what happened here are recorded by Granuaile herself, because she wrote down what had happened and made a petition to Elizabeth I. So she was I suppose she called the manager.
Yeah.
She was like, I guess again, kind of reflecting her character. She didn't have any qualm about writing directly to the court in London to try and get redress for what she saw as her wrongs. Bingham and Granuaile give quite differing accounts of what happened, but we can read out some of those letters. So Granuaile writes directly to Queen Elizabeth I, and she makes a petition. It's dated the 1st of July 1593, and it says, "To the Queen's most excellent Majesty." And Granuaile in this letter presents herself as a loyal servant, right? It begins, "In most humble wise show us unto your most excellent Majesty, your loyal and faithful servant, Granuaile of Connacht, in your highest realm of Ireland." So she absolutely sort of prefaces it with all the plumos of accepting the jurisdiction of the Queen over Ireland. And she basically says that she's been reduced to a terrible state. She's now widowed. At this point, her husband, the Burke husband, has died. And she says that, you know, she's in desperate circumstances. She doesn't have means to support herself, and she's been mistreated. And she petitions Elizabeth for some kind of means of sustenance. And she kind of makes up various cases as to her rights for that. And really interesting, is what happens then is she gets a kind of an answer back where she's asked 18 questions. And this is to clarify exactly her situation and what her claim is. And this was in the July of 1593. And this is amazing because Granuaile wrote back to the 18 questions. And in doing so, she gave an account of her own life and situation. It's coming, you know, from her own point of view, which is just a brilliant historical record to have. Because so often, you know, from Gaelic Ireland, we don't have written records, and certainly not from the first person, and certainly not from women. So the 18 questions were all about basically just the basics. Who were your father and mother? Who was your first husband? Who are your children? What happened to this? What's your maintenance? What are your lands? All of this kind of stuff.
Like, it's very much geared, first of all, to figure out, like, who are you anyway?
Yeah. No, they're completely confused. Clearly, they have no idea. Yeah.
Who are you anyway?
Yeah.
And secondly, like, by establishing all this genealogy stuff, they're trying to say, how much power exactly do you have in this place?
Indeed, yeah.
Yeah, but she doesn't take it like that as well. It's like, you want to know who I am? This is who I am. And she just goes for it, right?
Yeah. So it's actually funny. The questions do reveal such confusion because they ask her about who doth possess the country named Carramore and Main Connell. And she's like, what? She doesn't know what she's done. She's like, there's a few place names they mentioned. She's like, I do not recognize what that is.
Wow.
Things like that.
Wow.
You know, and they're asking stuff like, of what kindred is Walter Burg Fitztibbles? And they just like, they don't know who's related to who. They're totally confused. Anyway, so this information gathering operation produces a result which they probably weren't expecting. So the third question is just to give an account of her sons. And in this, Granuaile expresses a grievance. So she directly addresses to the monarch, to Elizabeth I, a wrong that has been done to her. So she says that Owen, which is one of her sons, had been loyal to the crown. And this is what she says. Owen all his lifetime remained a true subject to Her Majesty. The said Owen, according to Sir Richard's special direction, did withdraw himself, his followers and tenants with all their goods and cattle into a strong island for their more and better insurance. So they're told to like get into their castle and bring all of their stuff in there.
Now this is because the Borks on the mainland were rebelling against Richard Bingham.
Right.
But Owen, who is her Gráinne's son, says, no, listen, I'm with you and we'll get out of this. We're just going to get out of your way. We're going to go to our island.
They withdraw.
Yeah.
Having dealt with the rebels, then Bingham's forces come to Owen. So Owen came forth with a number of boats and ferried all the soldiers onto the island, where they were entertained with the best cheer that they had.
Oh, dun dun dun. I guess this is never ends well when when the Gaelic Irish entertain the colonists.
No. So they brought all the Bingham soldiers into their home in the context of this rebellion happening. That night, the said Owen was apprehended, tied with a rope, with 18 of his chief followers. In the morning, the soldiers drew out of the island 4,000 cows, 500 stud mares and horses, and 1,000 sheep, leaving the remainder of the poor men all naked within the islands. They took away all their wealth. This obviously, they had a lot, right? This is a wealthy family. That evening, Bingham caused said 18 persons without trial or good cause to be hanged, among whom was hanged a gentleman of land and living called Tybalt O'Toohil, being of the age of 80 years. So the 18 chief followers were all hanged summarily by Bingham. This is after they had been entertained and as guests by Owen. And among those killed was a 90-year-old man, it says. This is a little bit confusing, but it says, the next night following a false alarm was raised in the camp in the dead of night. The said Owen was cruelly murdered, having 12 deadly wounds. And in that miserable sort he ended his years and unfortunate days. So following the hanging of his chief followers, in some confusing situation subsequently within the Bingham camp, Owen was then killed. So this is a huge grievance that Granuaile is taking straight to Queen Elizabeth. Yeah. That Queen Elizabeth's agent in Ireland has violated the rules of hospitality and has hanged her son's chief followers and had him killed.
Yes. There seems to be an implication here. I mean, Bingham's saying, oh, this all happened by mistake. Oh, like, you know, here's a false alarm, etc., etc.
Yeah.
But then there's also this idea that he has 12 knife wounds. Like somebody stabbed him 12 times.
Yeah.
It's like, oops, this doesn't happen so easily.
Yeah.
I think there's an issue here if we think about this idea of Gráinne going to the manager, that is kind of what we're seeing here in the sense that like he's harassing her.
Yes.
Right? This is like a workplace dispute or something. Like he is harassing her in this unacceptable way and she kind of has good rights to go and see HR about this,
It's not the only offence. So question 11 that they posed to her was how she hath had maintenance and living since her last husband's death. So that's Bork who died. Okay, so it says that after her death of her last husband, she gathered all her followers and her 1,000 head of cows. So she's still a person of substantial means. After the death of her son Owen, a rebellion still going on, Sir Richard Bingham granted her his letters of tuition and willed her to come and dwell under him. On her journey, as she travelled, she was encountered by the 5 bands of soldiers under the leading of one of the Binghams, John Bingham. Thereupon she was apprehended and tied in a rope, as her son had been. Both she and her followers at that instant were spoiled of their said cattle and of all they ever had, and brought to Sir Richard, who caused a new pair of gallows to be made, it says that Granuaile thought to end her days at this point. So she thought that she was going to be hanged, but she was let at liberty upon the hostage and pledge of one Richard Burke, otherwise called the Devil's Hook. So that is her son-in-law. They've taken her son-in-law hostage, basically, one of her close followers, and let her free while holding him hostage. So this is part of the context to why she's writing. At this point in time, another son is being held hostage, or, is in capture by the Binghams, and also this son-in-law, and she is asking for them back, essentially. But she's also looking for redress and for this behavior of Bingham to stop. So what's really crucial in those passages where she describes what's happened, it's the treachery, right? She's been tricked, or they've been tricked twice by Bingham.
Yeah, and needlessly, right? This is kind of needless violence that's being visited upon her. I mean, she keeps saying, like, for instance, in the case of her first son, he was on your side, dude. Like, what the hell is this about?
Yeah.
And there is this sense of grief as well, I think, in these letters about her first son in particular. She seems very affected by that.
Yeah.
To the point that, I mean, and this is an amazing aspect of this, is that her younger son actually joins with Bingham despite all this, despite her oldest son having been killed. And she is so angry at her younger son that she goes to the town where he holds court, basically, burns the whole thing down, wrecks his castle and kills everyone. She says, right, happy? Because you're, you have let me down. You are a traitor to your family. Like, she goes mad.
She raids her own son. And that's how, so Richard Bingham, right, writes to the court to kind of give his side of the story. And it's very different. And that fact that Granuaile raided her own son is given as like one of the reasons kind of not to trust her. So he says, this was the last notable act which she did in particular. I could set down many more. And essentially he depicts her as just someone completely unreliable, someone who's been, just like a fighting bandit for many years. And he writes, now they are pulled down and forced in spite of their hearts to submit themselves to her majesty. They pretend many wrongs and are not ashamed to ask recompense. So basically he's saying that, she's just making up this stuff in order to try to better her situation. He doesn't really go into the details, but he doesn't accept that, what he's accused of.
Okay, so Gráinne has already brought this to the top. She is complaining about what's going on in Ireland. And I think she really has a real feeling that if she tells Elizabeth about this, that Elizabeth won't be happy either. And she's right. Because Bingham isn't actually acting in a very judicious way or prudent way from anyone's point of view.
He's sort of lashing out all over the place. And the crucial thing that I think this is part of what motivates her as well is she's already lost one son, right? The bitter circumstances of that, the violation of the ancient hospitalities law, is obviously crucial to her grief. Part of what's motivating her here, clearly, is she is afraid that she's going to lose her other son, who is in Bingham's custody. So she writes in a separate letter in September 1593, she begs for her son to be released. And she writes that the poor youth of the country are so extremely used as they are most commonly executed before they be justly tried, or the cause heard whereof. So she's worried that he's just going to be summarily killed in the same way as her previous son was. And I think that's kind of, you can see that's what's motivating her to take this extraordinary step of writing to the Queen and actually coming to visit in person.
Okay, right. So let's get to this visit then.
Yeah.
So at this point, her youngest son, Tibbet Nalung, Tibbet of the ships is what it means. He is imprisoned in Dublin Castle, which is kind of high-profile political prisoner kind of a situation.
Right.
And she needs to get him out of there because, like you say, she's terrified he's just going to get his head chopped off.
Right.
So off she goes on her ship. Now, this is a kind of spectacular vision, really, of Gráinne moving across the seas because she's going to leave Clew Bay, go all the way along the coast of Ireland, all the way along the coast of England, and then right up the Thames to London. Now, she goes to Greenwich Palace, which is where the Greenwich Observatory is today. And she goes in there, and this is where the court is staying for the time being, which is this kind of a summer palace that they have outside the city.
Yeah.
And she spends about 3 months there. She's there from June until September, I believe. But it's three or 4 months anyway. So I think we could really understand this as something very similar to a modern diplomatic mission, right? So she's there, she's not just talking, she's not just going up to the Queen's door and knocking on the door. She's going to be talking to courtiers, she's going to be talking to other people who have influence, she's going to be mentioning stuff. And like one of the things she says in her letters before she comes there is that some of the people who killed her son are there. Right. So, like, the people who killed my son Owen are in court at the moment.
Right.
So she would have been, going and actually seeing them, the people who killed her son walking around in gardens or courtyards or whatever.
Yeah, yeah.
Now, the idea here is that the Queen has a lot of people to see. And, this would have been quite literal. The monarch makes literally all the laws in the country, makes all the decisions. They're like a little dictator.
Yeah.
So they really do have a lot of people to see in one day, So trying to see them would have taken quite a long time, and getting your recommendation to see them, why should you see them and for how long should you see them on whatever. But she does. She does succeed in seeing the Queen, and they have this absolutely famous meeting where the two of them, remember, are pretty much the same age.
They're mirror images of each other.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
It's absolutely fascinating.
Two women leaders from like two different worlds.
Yeah.
And they're kind of brought into this collision.
Yeah.
But the sense you get is that they found some sort of mutual respect.
Yeah, for sure.
Because Granuaile won.
Yeah.
She was successful in presenting her case.
She gets the Queen to give her a letter saying, Bingham, back off. Basically,
release my family members, release the son, release them all, and treat with them properly, and give them the lands that are theirs.
Yeah. Like why this happened, why she was so successful. I mean, there's a lot of things we could say about this. I think we might save it for our half pint, which we'll be recording directly after this episode. Listeners, if you would like to listen to more about Granuaile after this episode, you can find us on Patreon at www.patreon.com/The Irish Passport, where we make extra contents called half pints all the time, where you can find us if you subscribe and support the podcast along the way. There's a plug for you, Naomi.
Well
Look at me getting that
seamlessly done.
Beautifully put in. But we will discuss that more in the half pint. But the point really is that she wins. This is a successful diplomatic mission, which is, not a small feat considering the alien world that she's coming into. I know she knows the Norman, like the Hibernicized Normans. She knows the New English, but the court of Elizabeth I is another kettle of fish for anyone. For someone from Northumberland, let alone someone from Clú Bay in the Gaelic world.
This isn't something she would have had to reckon with at all at the beginning of her life, and I think it really shows the arc of English influence in Ireland over this period. It's gone from being the Gaelic lord didn't have to worry about the politics of the English court at all at the start of her life, and it's reversed so profoundly that she actually has to go and beg for a living from them. That's how profound the destabilizing effect has been of the invasion. So she goes, she makes her case. There's so many myths and legends about this meeting. There's it's recorded in poetry. There's all sorts of sort of stories that are told about it, and really we don't know if any of it's true. The leading authority really on Granuaile is Anne Chambers, and we've relied a lot on her research and her work in this episode throughout, particularly her translation of things like the state papers and letters between different key characters in this story. She did that research, and we're kind of relying on it, and we'll link to her book in the show notes. But she thinks that while the received legend is that Queen Elizabeth and Granuaile conversed in Latin, because it was their shared language, she thinks it probably took place in English.
Right.
It would make more sense for them to have spoken in English. I think that's a kind of an appealing legend because it speaks to the dominance of Irish in Ireland at this time, which was perfectly true.
Sure.
And also kind of, it gives a flattering idea of, the level of education of the Gaelic aristocracy, that someone like Granuaile would be able to converse in Latin to a monarch, to, like a fellow ruler, that they'd be able to use this language of learning together. But it probably, they just spoke English.
Yeah, right. It's interesting. It's an interesting idea. If they were to have spoken in Latin, they would have been able. That wouldn't have been an unusual thing, like Queen Elizabeth, one of her hobbies, this is a funny thing about Queen Elizabeth, one of her hobbies was to translate Latin into English and then translate the English back into Latin again.
Oh.
This is what she did in her downtime.
Okay.
Just
some light translation, guys.
Some light double translation to see how good she could get it back, right on her own. But it just shows you quite how fluent these people were in Latin.
That is interesting.
All of their education in Latin, all of the mass in Latin. Latin was a lingua franca franca. You know, it was very much
Yeah.
a language. So it's not impossible to imagine this happening in Latin. And
Right.
if Granuaile spoke English, you know, Irish people's English wasn't great at this point. And if you imagine, like, yeah, actually, if you imagine, I was about to say Queen Elizabeth II, but King Charles III speaking to someone from Kerry
Yeah.
today in English,
He might struggle.
he might struggle. And
Yeah.
this is what someone from Clube would have sounded like. You know, much, much more so, I imagine, because, of course, the English that she would have heard was probably spoken mainly by other second language speakers, right? And a kind of provincial version of English as well that's surviving out here in the West. So, yeah, I mean, I don't know. Latin seems a little bit more likely to me, but
Could
you
be,
never
or
know.
maybe they were even relying on translators.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, this is kind of where the story of Granuaile ends because, like you say, she's becomes this microcosm of the colonization of Ireland. At this point, when she is going to petition in person Elizabeth, she's lost everything.
Yeah.
The colonists have taken all her land, they've taken all her cattle, they've taken all her ships, they've taken all her boats. She doesn't have anything anymore, just like it happened to the Desmonds, just like it happened to the rest of Gaelic Ireland. They had been hollowed out.
Yeah.
And like you say, she's reduced to this state where she's like, can I have a little bit of a pension because I did surrender and regrant and hopefully just not die poor and on the street?
Right.
Yeah.
So basically what the Queen Elizabeth orders is that her sons should get the bit of territory that they are entitled to, and that they should make provision for her from the territory that they have a right to. And from this, Granuaile gets back a few boats and like a modicum of power. Granuaile offers to prosecute wars on their behalf, so to fight their enemies on their behalf. And that's something that the Queen acknowledges in her letter back, where she basically says, "We do right in her favour, as she showeth herself dutiful, although she hath in former times lived out of order, as being charged by her treasurer with the evil usage to her son that served her dutifully." That's a reference to her ransacking her own son.
Oh.
"She hath confessed the same with assured promises by oath to continue most dutiful, with offer after her aforesaid manner, that she will fight in our quarrel with all the world." So they've enrolled her, essentially. And it's just a hugely profound contrast, right? Because she was someone who started with absolute autonomy. This was someone who was able to create her own life, her own power source. She was able to self-realize herself as someone to be reckoned with in a society where there wasn't really a template, or certainly not a current day template for that to happen as a woman. She's gone from that to having to kind of work through this system in order to reclaim some of what she previously had. But that wasn't really the end of the story of Granuaile. So, as we mentioned, she died same year as Elizabeth I, so lives that curiously echo each other. But her posthumous life was as colourful as the one that she actually lived, because she became a figure of incredible importance culturally. She's been somewhat neglected by historians, and there's a sort of absence of historical records, particularly of the time and immediately after, which kind of, maybe it was to do with how she didn't quite fit the mold of leaders of the time. But what there's absolutely no shortage of are these legends and tales about her and literature about her, which records so much of her personality and also reflects the importance that her character has been given, like how much weight she had as a person. That, like, kind of the myth and legend of Granuaile maintained where the historical record kind of omitted her. So I think maybe we'll turn now to our half point. In our bonus debrief episode, we'll go through some of those myths, legends, and stories about her, and some of how the political uses to which her memory has been put in modern times.
Absolutely, which in many ways is the most interesting part of the story. So in case you missed it, you can find that after show debrief on among our over 100 half pints now at www.patreon.com/the Irish Passport. I had so much fun researching Granuaile.
It was fantastic. Yeah.
And one more shout out to Anne Chambers. You can find her book Grace O'Máille, the biography of Ireland's pirate queen 1530 to 1603, because that is an absolutely fantastic source of information. Very compact, very consistent. A little book there with everything you need to know about Granuaile, and we'll put a link to it in the show notes.
Slán for now.
Slán.